Hi everyone, Chris here from Tennant Painter Studio, and today we're going to be talking about my top 10 tips on how you can batch paint much easier. What is batch painting? Well, batch painting very simply is painting a batch of models all in one go. You might have a large unit of 10, 20 Space Marines, Goblins, Skaven, whatever. You have a couple of options. You can either paint each model individually, or you can group all of the units together and paint them in one large assembly line. If you're doing a very small army, such as Adeptus Custodes or Stormcast, then maybe you do have the time to paint individual models up to a really high standard. But if you're playing Goblins, Skaven or anything else, you might be better off batch painting. Batch painting is literally as it sounds. You're going to take all your models and you're going to paint them in a large batch in a sort of assembly line, one step at a time sort of way. Today I'm going to talk about my top 10 tips which are going to help you batch paint an awful lot easier. Now, I should point out that all of these tips are purely my own opinion. If you've got any other ideas, please do drop a comment below or send us a message and we make sure to respond to every single one of them. So my first tip is to plan what needs to be painted. Now that sounds quite obvious, however, what I need you to do there is really look at the model. If we throw up an example of this Night Goblin, so you can see by looking at the different parts of the model that need to be painted, what is going to be the best sort of order to do things in. I would recommend at this point also writing down a list of the different parts, such as belt and weapons and things like that, to make sure that you don't miss them. You can act like a little bit of a checklist. Our second tip is assembly. Now, some models are going to be single pose models with very open stances, and they are perfect for batch painting. Now, some models will have weapons that are covering up, like Space Marines. They're going to be covering up areas of the model which are going to make it much more difficult to paint later on. Look at maybe leaving guns off, or certain arms removed, or shields, or perhaps the model is quite open. Have a look at the model to work out what extra steps you might need to take to make your life easier. Tip number 3, what level of painting are you aiming to achieve? For example, are you looking to make a whole army of really high detailed, basically character golden demon winning pieces each and every time? If so, batch painting is not really going to be the tip for you. But also, if you are painting a very large army, do they really need to be that detailed? For most of our commissions here, it might just be a case of base coat, overcoat, dry brush, wash, or a few of those steps mixed in. A few of them might need a highlight. Look at what the model is and where actually needs to be done. I would also say along these lines, do be reasonable with what your own level of standard is. How long do you want to take to paint this unit? Now, if you're batch painting 100 zombies, for example, it's not reasonable that you're going to pick out every single one of their eyes. You're not going to do all their fingernails, all that sort of stuff. You're going to want something that's going to be quite quick and easy to do. Next one, quite a simple one, is how are you going to base the miniatures? Before you apply any undercoat to anything, you need to think about what's going to happen. Are you going to be using a pre-textured sand, such as ones from Army Painter? Are you going to be using the Games Workshop technical paints, or the texture paint, sorry, in order to create a basing? Or are you going to put sand on before you start and then paint it up as you go along? These are things you're going to look at before you start doing a large batch of models, because it's going to be much easier to do at the very beginning with certain things than doing it right at the very end. Tip number 5, clear your workstation. Now, what I mean by this is quite literally clear your workstation. If you've got a previous project on there, clear it all away. Put all the paints away, put all of the extra tools away, so what you've got in front of you is just the models you're going to focus on. It's very easy to get cluttered up when you're painting, so I would really recommend put all the brushes, make sure they're all clean, make sure your water pots are all fresh water in there, so you're in a mindset for painting and it's clear. It will make your life so much easier, especially when we move on to our next tip. Our next tip is really easy. This is limit your palette. The more paints that you have, the more paints you tend to want to use. I have a very large collection of paints here, and I've got more over there and more down there. I've probably got around about 1,000 different paints from collecting over the years. Am I going to use all 1000 in a single model? Definitely not. What I like to do is if I'm painting models to a reasonable tabletop standard, I like to really limit down to a base coat, a highlight, a wash, maybe a dry brush. So at absolute most, 3 to 4 paints for each area. Some things are only going to require a base coat and a wash. That's only 2. But really think about, do you need 17 different paints to do the cloth on a night goblin? Probably not. Really look at how you can take away some of the paints. And also, the same thing goes to that, is limit your palette in the number of different colours you're going to use on a miniature. A good way to limit your palette is to consider spot colour. Now what spot colour is you consider the miniature to be more or less one uniform colour. So for example, we take again our example of a night goblin. The night goblin is mostly going to be black. However, the face, the arms and the weapon, they are going to be quite a different vivid colour. Obviously you've got the green skin, you've got the metal, and in some cases whatever the actual staff will be. The rest of it is going to be very dark. That means that that face and that weapon is going to stand out. That is going to be the goblin's spot colours. So what you want to make sure you do, in this case of a goblin, is make sure that you get a really nice sharp highlight on the nose, on the hands, so they really stand out. It's a very easy way to make the model look so much better, especially when it's part of a larger unit. Tip number 7, what is going to be the best base coat for your miniatures? Well, this is not talking about a specific brand such as Iron Paint or Citadel Vallejo, not talking about anything like that. What I'm talking about is what are you going to be painting? What is going to be the best colour to put down as a very simple layer? Are you going to be using contrast paints mostly? Then you're going to be looking at lighter colours in the light greys to whites or the wraith bone or anything like that. If you're going to be painting vehicles or lots of metallics, I would recommend you're going to use black. There are a huge range of different coloured primers available now. Always stick to primers that are made by model companies. I would avoid anything that comes from the supermarket or car sprays. They're going to be far too thick, but you know, stick to the actual ones from hobby stores. You're going to be much better off. But there's such a wide range. I mean, just looking at what I've got here, we've got an Ultramarines blue one. If you're doing Space Marines, that's going to be perfect. A really good, simple base coat that cuts out a step for you. You can use the black ones. You've got the necrotic flesh here. This all came, by the way, from the unboxing video I did. You can see a link to that up on the top of the screen now. I'll put that up if I remember to. Those different paints there are going to make your painting life easier. Also, if you don't want to go for a coloured spray, I would personally stick with black unless you're trying to do an army it's going to be yellows or whites, such as Imperial Fists or White Scars. So really think about the base coat that you're going to use. It's going to speed up your painting so much more. Take a miniature which is similar to what you're going to be painting overall. Maybe you've got a spare one. If you're, like I say, using the Night Goblin example, you're probably going to have a couple of spare ones there, and just paint one up and write down what you're using and where. From the base coats, the highlights, it will really help you later on to remember. I would also say that if you mix any colours, make sure you write down the ratios. Personally, if I'm batch painting, I don't like to mix colours very much, only because later on you're going to find it difficult to get that same consistency later. So personally, there are now so many different colours available through all the different companies, Citadel, Vallejo, Game Colour, etc. Pick one of those that's going to match best you can and stick with it. It's going to make your life so much easier. But paint that test figure. This brings me on to my next point as well. Tip number 9 is to work out the best order to paint things in. Now, personally for me, I like to paint the lightest stuff first. You can be quite messy with it, it's not a problem. And then you're going to apply the darker colours later. So, for example, a recent commission I did was a Land Raider Primaris. What I did with this is I actually applied the edge highlight quite roughly over the model, and then I went back in with the darker blue and tidied up all of the lines. If you're painting again, let's stick with the Night Goblin as a really good example. You can paint the face, and you can be quite messy around the outside of the cloak where the face is, and the hands, etc., and the weapons, because the cloak is going to be black. The actual haft of the weapon is going to be more likely going to be a darker colour like a wood. So what you can do is you can really focus on the highlights on that area and then tidy up later on with a darker colour. Of course, if you are going to do that, you do have to be a little bit neater, because it's going to be more difficult to correct it if you do get any of the black onto the lighter area. So just be careful of that. But overall, I like to do light to dark, but plan what you're going to do in what order. There's no point doing all the fiddly little details and then having to do a very large area later on, because you're going to have a higher chance of making a mistake or catching a part you don't want to. But always have a plan of what order to do things in. Write down your checklist of what's going to happen in what order. It eliminates the chances of you actually missing things and then having to go back. It will still happen, believe me, it happens an awful lot. We had over 80 what they called marauders a little while ago, and the amount of little pouches and things like that on them, very easy to miss something. Have to go back and check. As a little extra point then, double check your miniatures. Just take a moment after you finish painting, put the brushes down, go through each model, have a little look. If you've missed something, anything at all from any of the previous steps, just put it to one side. And later on, when you've got a moment, just go through each one and look at it and work out what area you missed, tidy that one in, put it back again. Go all the way through so you don't miss any parts. And finally, our tip number 10 is learn where to cut corners. Now, I'm not trying to encourage anyone here to be lazy. What I want you to do is I want you to look at the miniatures you're going to paint and think what areas really need to be done. What areas really need to be highlighted. Do you really need to paint every single part of that miniature? What is the purpose of it going to be on the battlefield? If it's going to be the last rank of a large unit of Skaven clan rats, does it need to be as detailed and focused as the units on the very front line, the banner, the standard bearers, things like that? Probably not. Could you get away with doing a dry brush rather than an edge highlight? Is a wash going to tidy up the areas an awful lot? Personally, to me, washes are like liquid talent. They are such a great way after a dry brush to really bring the model back in together. So look at all the little areas you can cut those corners on. Things that don't necessarily need to be done. Sometimes just putting a contrast wash over certain areas such as skin will allow you to get the unit done much, much quicker. So these are my top 10 tips. I really hope you find some of them useful. As I said before, if you have any of your own, please do drop a comment below. If you have any ideas for any future videos, again, drop that comment below. I will read every single one of them and I'll do my best to respond to them as well. Have a great day, enjoy your painting, and I'll see you in the next video. Just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, then subscribe to the channel for more. You can also consider supporting us on Patreon. Just $2 a month goes a very long way to keeping the channel going and providing new content every single week. Make sure to follow us on social media. We'll see you in the next video.